You're listening to BioTalk with Rich Bendis, the only podcast focused on the BioHealth Capital Region. Each episode, we'll talk to leaders in the industry to break down the biggest topics happening today in biohealth.
Hi, this is Rich Bendis, your host for BioTalk, and I have a very unique guest today, and some of you have already heard him. If you were at the BioHealth Capital Region Forum in September that we had in Rockville, where the theme we had is where human and artificial intelligence converge. And we really needed to have some experts on both AI and quantum computing come in and speak to us to educate us all. And I got our guest name from Jack Miner with TEDCO, who said, you need to bring Whurley up here from Austin, Texas to talk to us. And I said, who's Whurley? And I found out very quickly who Whurley was. Basically, whom we have on the podcast today is Whurley, who's the CEO of Strangeworks from Austin, Texas, who gave a keynote presentation at our forum, which stimulated a lot of conversation during and after the meeting. So, Whurley, welcome to BioTalk.
Well, thank you very much, Rich. It's good to see you again and talk to you. I'm very excited to talk to all of our friends out in the audience about the wonders of quantum and everything. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
You're welcome. And rather than me introduce you and read the bio, which we had in the program, I think the best thing we could do is ask you to introduce yourself from as far back as you want to go to where you are today and how you evolved into this expert within this technology area called quantum and all things technology. So you can roll right now with that, Whurley.
I've had a different career path, as many people know. Didn't go to a formal university or anything. I got out of high school, started touring with the band, got in a bad accident, and that led me into tech. But I started my career at Apple answering phones and advanced to running the training programs and then working in R&D, and left Apple in 1997 to go to work at IBM as a principal engineer. I ran projects and research labs around the world. I became a master inventor, which is a fancy way of saying I did patents that made them a lot of money, and then bounced around between big companies and startups from 2000 to 2009. I was at a lot of system management companies like Tivoli and Clusters and BMC, and learned that startups kind of badmouth our friends in the corporate world because there's too much bureaucracy and too much this. And the corporate world kind of says, oh, the startup guys are too willy-nilly and they don't have their act together. And I kind of started building a model for how to build companies. And that led to me founding my first company in 2010, which is called Chaotic Moon. It was a company in the mobile space. It did extremely well, sold to Accenture, kind of became a big part of Accenture Labs and their entire mobile strategy. Had a gaming company we spun out of that during that time that was acquired by Zynga. Then in 2015, I decided to go, hey, I'm going to jump into fintech, which everybody saw as this horrible change. Like, well, what do you know about finance? Well, I know about software. And so I really don't necessarily care about the industry. Software is software. There's plenty of subject matter experts. Started a company called Honest Dollar, which was the first technology company acquired by Goldman Sachs in its 147-year history just for technology because we didn't have any assets under management. Spent a couple of years in the Goldman Sachs management team trying to get them more involved in quantum. Started the IEEE Quantum Computing Standards Working Group, started the Linux Foundation Global Quantum Initiative, which both of those kind of stalled a little bit because all the quantum companies didn't really want to work together. And then said, well, you know what? I think I'll just tell my wife, I'm sorry I lied about retiring into the Linux Foundation. I'm going to start another company. And that led to me founding Strangeworks.
Now, quite a background, and what we have is two uneducated CEOs talking to one another, entrepreneurial CEOs. And a lot of people don't know my background. I'm not going to go into it now. We'll keep that a secret for another time. But let's talk a little bit about Strangeworks. And the name by itself is curious. Talk a little bit about how you came up with the name and actually what does Strangeworks do?
That's awesome. Well, how we came up with the name is a pretty simple one. I always know the next three things I'm going to work on as an entrepreneur. And I had Strangeworks as one of those. I'm always like, oh, this is a cool name. It's a cool domain. Strangeworks fit for quantum. And it fit for quantum because quantum is very strange. And I wanted to make strange work, literally, for all these businesses. I immediately was like, this is the way to go. But what does Strangeworks do? Well, look, we have a bunch of different things that we've built over the years. But if you want to look at it from a simplistic view, we've set up an infrastructure across this heterogeneous kind of hybrid platform. Heterogeneous meaning that we have CPUs and GPUs and TPUs and QPUs for quantum and quantum inspired, all tied together. Hybrid meaning we have software and AI that lets you break problems down and put them on the best computational resource at the best time to pull it out an answer. But that sounds so complicated. And when you say that, and you say quantum, you end up in innovation departments and not the departments with the big budget. And when you look at what all of our customers do, from BP to J&J to Raytheon and others, what they do is optimization and machine learning. And so really at its core, that's what we do in the simplest form.
So when you talk about optimization and machine learning, now machine learning's, everybody says AI, machine learning, quantum. So if you're saying they're doing machine learning, differentiate what machine learning is versus what quantum computing is.
Yeah, I mean, that's great. I'll give it to you a little different. I'll give it to you in the case of like an actual use case. So if you wanted to look at two pharma opportunities, right? So one, you take a look at something like, okay, improving quality of pharmaceuticals. So what are the quality attributes? How can you enrich a data set before the model training for embedding it into classical data into quantum circuits? That's stuff you're doing in pharma with quantum computers. That's quantum feature augmentation. And then you've got quantum feature selection, where you're constructing a dense cubo matrix of elements representing the importance of that. Compare that then to machine learning, which would be looking at processes and having the machine learn them and work with them. So something like accelerating interoperable machine learning for clinical diagnostics, right? Where you're trying to find an interoperable classification rules from training data for predicting new instances and uncovering relationships between generalized aspects for clinicians. So in the quantum world, the quantum is a processor. In the machine learning world, the machine learning is software learning, as I just gave in that example in pharmaceuticals. AI, of course, is trying to build an artificial intelligence for that or many, many other things. I hope that's fairly clear for the audience.
Well, I think that clarifies some, but one of the things that's very unique about the last 20, 30 years is everybody likes to get on the latest buzzword and want to be the leader within whatever that buzzword is. So it goes way back under semiconductors when that was really the rage. Everybody wanted to be the leader in semi. And then we got into cybersecurity. Then we had biotechnology. But really what we're talking about is enabling technologies generally that don't have an end product. They enable other people to do something better by incorporating their technology. Now we're into the quantum world, but everybody can't be the leader in quantum because you don't have the assets or the knowledge or the technology or the human intelligence that's needed to be an expert within quantum. So that's why it's a little more specialized field. So talk a little bit about this being that enabling tool. And really, since this is called BioTalk, how it really relates to the biohealth and the biotech industry.
Absolutely. So how can quantum computing enable a breakthrough in such a complex area, right? Like biohealth problems are super complex. Look first to things like molecular simulation, something that's beyond the classical limits. So what would a quantum computer offer the potential to do? Model large biomolecules with chemical accuracy, right? Predict binding affinities and reaction pathways, accelerating drug discovery by reducing the trial and error cycle. So in that molecular simulation area, those are kind of three examples of the kind of stuff you could do. And so it's like, think about most biological processes, protein folding, enzyme catalyst, drug target binding, being governed by quantum mechanics. And so classical methods can rely on approximations, we do like DFT or molecular dynamics, that break down for large or highly correlated system those things. Quantum offers a way to model nature one-to-one potentially, right? And so this can replace the guess in chemistry with first principles simulation, which is awesome. Another area to look at is optimization of clinical and biological systems. So healthcare is full of NP hard optimization problems, clinical trial design, personalized treatment pathways, vaccine distribution logistics, genomic interpretations, even hospital resource allocations, like all the way down to like staffing. And so there's a bunch of optimization things that you can use quantum optimization. So quantum approximation algorithms, so QAOAs, or QUBOs or quantum inspired solvers that could explore these massive solution spaces faster. They could find better, more personalized treatment plans. They could reduce costs in clinical trials. We've done that for several of our customers, or improve real world healthcare delivery, right? So, and when you get out of those two, which I think are pretty big positive cases for quantum can be really important in this area we're talking about, You then get into things like AI plus quantum, right? And like precision medicine. So high dimensional spaces and multi-omics integration, complex biological networks. And we said earlier, we kind of do optimization machine learning. Well, that's where the quantum machine learning enters. So faster training on high dimensional feature spaces, improving pattern recognitions and detection in noisy biological data, hybrid models to integrate genomics and pronomics and phenomics and all these things that I've had to learn as I've worked in your industry. That I'm like, I program software. Uncle. And then, of course, there's all the things like protein and biomaterial design and understandings of biological complexities and high integrity biodata handling and stuff. But I mean, the bottom line is that quantum computing is not replacing HPC or AI, it's amplifying them, right? Like together, they're going to make faster, more accurate discovery. Together, they're going to do personalized predictive medicine. Together, they're going to do better healthcare delivery optimization, as I mentioned a moment ago, or deeper understanding of disease mechanisms. So that's why, everybody's always like quantum as if it's this thing that's going to replace all these things. Quantum is going to make AI better. Quantum is going to make all of the biotech stuff you're doing better. Quantum is a underlying technology. I like to think about TCP/IP back in the day. Nobody made money off TCP/IP. AT&T tried to license it. They couldn't. When they open sourced it, when it became prolific and we had the internet, trillions of dollars of opportunities were created on top of it. I kind of like to think of quantum as the same way. It's this base technology. AI is on top of quantum, machine learning is on top of quantum, right? And it's going to fundamentally allow us to do things that we just haven't been able to do before.
So, simplified, you might have multiple enabling technologies converging to work together to optimize to get a better solution.
Yeah, 100%.
That's from a neophyte who doesn't know anything about anything, Whurley. So, when you talk about healthcare, some people are early adopters, some are late to the game. So, when you get into the biohealth, biotech, healthcare arena, where did the healthcare industry recognize that quantum could be beneficial to their operations and optimization? Have they been late to the game, or were there some very early adopters that actually you began to work with Strangeworks that really got it before others? And the last part of this question is, you basically can do so many things for different operations within an organization. How do you know where to go, where you're going to get that champion inside a company that really wants to work with you?
That second one's hard. We'll get to that in a second. But to answer your first question in order, there's a lot of leaders in this space that are looking at quantum. We work with J&J and many others. J&J is obviously very visionary, very big healthcare focus. There's Novo Nordisk, who put $200 million towards investing in quantum startups, in addition to the quantum program stuff that they're doing. So Bayer, Pfizer, so many companies saw quantum early. Why? Because they know what they spend on compute and they know what the challenges of compute in their areas are. And if you want to take a caffeine molecule, it's got like 160 something components. You need this huge amount of memory and this very cost prohibitive infrastructure to build a digital twin of that. But a quantum computer could do that in that same number of qubits, a couple hundred qubits. And so for pharma, this is a very natural, like, this makes sense. They get it. They're out looking at it. They're out adopting it kind of early. Finance takes a little longer, some other areas, but pharma really, it's a one-to-one match, right? You have a bunch of NP plus BQP problems that are really hard computationally, and you have a bunch of stuff you're doing with nature, with the simulation of nature. And so being able to have a machine infrastructure that you can simulate one-to-one on, which is the kind of the dream of quantum, that becomes really, 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 really helpful in biohealth innovation and what these companies are trying to do.
So let's go to that second part. Let me rephrase it again. And that's basically, I'm a salesman, you're a salesman. And so one of the most difficult sales is when you've got an emerging technology, which you have to educate people on the sale at the same time as you're trying to sell. How do you determine where the greatest needs are within an organization? How do you get to the ultimate person that's going to be the champion to adopt this technology within a large corporation? Because all the names you mentioned are large companies, basically, and it's very hard to break through to get to that decision and the purchaser and the decision maker.
So it is and it isn't. It can be very easy to break through. It's very hard to break through to the big amount of budget that they have. So in most cases, when you say quantum, you say, "Hi, I'm Strangeworks. We do quantum software." You get put into the innovation department, which has a smaller budget, but a bigger mandate for earlier adoption of these kind of things, right? And so the catch is, how do I, as a leader, take the company from there to the other? And the way I've done that is we've kind of rethought the way we position ourselves. So you would meet me and say, "What do you do?" I'd say quantum software. And say, "Oh, that's interesting." And we get our discussion about quantum mechanics before we even talk about the company. Or like you said, there's a big education thing. And there's other factors, right? Like when you say that, then I have to tell you, well, I built a platform that ties together the largest collection of quantum machines on Earth. And I've got all this algorithmic stuff, and I've got these other libraries. And again, all of a sudden you're like, "Oh, you do so much." Like it's confusing for the customers, for investors, for anybody. And so what we did is recently is we started realizing quantum is the feature, not the benefit. It's being sold in the public markets as the benefit, but it's not. It's the feature, right? Like I said, it's this underpinning on which all these other things happen. And so the way we do it now is you say, "Well, what does Strangeworks do?" "Well, we do optimization and machine learning." Ah, because when I say that into a biohealth infrastructure, even a big company, there's somebody there who does optimization. There's somebody there who does machine learning, and they already get it. So now they want to know, how do you do it? And you say, "Well, what do you do it for?" "Well, we do it for anything." "And how do you do it?" "Well, we have a heterogeneous hybrid optimization platform that has all the quantum applied quantum resources, all of the quantum inspired, and all of the classical in one infrastructure, and the software to make them all work together. We use AI to break your problem down, formulate it, evaluate the formulations and the approaches. Is it a linear programming, MIP? Is it QBO?" And then we can find the right algorithms within those, put it all together, and put it out to whatever machine at whatever time it needs to get you a solution in the fastest, most efficient way possible. And so, even though that is still too wordy for my taste, that is easy for everyone that's listening to this call to understand. You're going to take something at my company and you're going to make it better or faster or smarter. I get that. And by the way, if my sales question, Rich, to go back to that sales thing you said, is instead of saying, "Hey, what would you like to do with quantum?" I say, "Rich, is there anything in your organization you'd like to work better, faster, or smarter?" Everyone I talk to has two or three things instantly. And then I can say, "Where are you at in that journey? Are you starting it? Are you building it? Are you scaling it?" And when I say that, I know exactly how much I'm going to have to handhold versus how much I can just dump software in your lap. And quantum becomes not secondary, but quantum becomes a way that we're doing a thing that your business understands and wants to acquire and to purchase, right? And so then you say, "Well, I've heard about quantum." "Yeah, you're covered. Quantum inspired, you're covered." "Well, you know what? We're not so sure about those. We only like the classical stuff." You're covered. And for most of our customers, you'll find that they run on classical, quantum inspired, and quantum all the time anyway, because they benchmark them. They want to know how far out quantum is from doing the thing if it doesn't do it, or they want to know how much of an improvement it is if it does. So that's kind of how we've been handling that. And that has resulted just in the past few months. Again, not a big change. I've got a slide deck. I'll show you sometime. It says it's a difference between "let's eat grandma" and "let's eat, comma, grandma." So one character makes a dramatic difference in the meanings and outcomes in those two. And so saying optimization, saying machine learning, everybody gets it. And then you're like, "We can do that with quantum. We can do it quantum inspired." And they understand. So it's been a lot easier over the past few months to get a lot more traction using that approach rather than leading yourself off on this. I heard Google said that quantum computation can only happen across parallel dimensions. Are there multiple worlds, really? I don't know. Your business problem was what again, sir?
Right. You talk about quantum software development. And I used to have a hospital software company. We developed software to manage the pharmacy within a hospital, but it ran on IBM computers or Texas Instrument mini computers. That's a lot different. IBM 36 versus and a TI mini computer versus a quantum computer in developing software. So I would imagine, and I didn't ask you this before, do you have your own quantum computers for development, or do you access other quantum computers when you're doing your development as well as testing of quantum software, William?
Great question. So we don't have our own quantum computers. We're a software company, not a hardware company. However, we have the largest collection of quantum computers anywhere. So this means the D-Waves, the IBMs, the Rigettis, the IonQs, all of them we have access to. And our platform manages both the data input and output of those and the accessibility, what, is the availability of these machines. So we focus on the software and solving the problem and using whichever one of those pieces of hardware, because even among quantum computers, one has more qubits, which in theory means more memory. One has more processing power. One works this way. The thing that people don't ever understand is a qubit is not a qubit is not a qubit. It's not like a bit. And you mentioned it's the mini computers and the Texas Instruments and everything. It's not like that. We can't benchmark these things one to one necessarily, because an annealing qubit's different than a photonic, than a superconducting, than a ion trap. So we focus on building the software and solutions that allow customers like yourself, like J&J, BP, all these other companies, be able to find what is a match for their problem and be able to work on their problem in the most efficient way possible. So it's all software infrastructure on our side.
We're speaking with Whurley, who's the CEO of Strangeworks, a quantum software developer in Austin, Texas. And it's a specialized field, Whurley. So talk a little bit about finding people that fit the culture. Understood. What's the criteria for people you're looking for to bring into Strangeworks? How difficult it is to find these people that are in this new quantum world? Do they have the knowledge, or do you train them within the company?
So this is what's great. We have a unique advantage compared to all other companies in this space, which is we are a software company. So before anything with quantum, I'm looking for really, really good actual software engineers, not hackers, not painters, more people that really understand software. When it comes to the quantum talent, it becomes easier for them to self-select. And look, I'll be very blunt. The way we approach talent is as we work with all these companies and all these machines, all this stuff, and we find the guy or the gal that's really fits our culture that's doing it, then we start putting the long play out and bringing them in a year from now or 16 months from now, or watching that, oh, hey, their company had some layoffs. Did you get laid off? Great. You can come over here now. So it's not really like advertising, hey, we're looking for software engineers to work in quantum. We pretty much know who we're going to hire months in advance of hiring them. And the other way we do it is acquisition. In August, we closed the acquisition of Quantagonia, a brilliant team of German engineers and physicists that work on quantum and quantum optimization specifically. They started Garobi GmbH over there in Europe. They've done tons of great work. Pulling them in, acquiring a team of 15, taking me 20 to 35, where now I've got a team that already functions together in a geography I don't work in. I think it's a really smart way to do it because now I have a European operation that's already been operational for 4 years. I'm not changing things. I'm not mixing it up. And we started working with them several years ago to use their solutions for our clients. So we had years of experience of the two teams working together. So everybody already knew everybody. So that's kind of how we've done it at Strangeworks today.
That's excellent. Let's talk a little bit about the healthcare industry, which I have a little background in. And are you working with any hospital clients or big hospital chains related to their optimization at this point?
We aren't. We've only recently started talking to them, which has been really, really exciting. In fact, that's part of the reason I wanted to speak at BioHealth Innovation is that's a big entryway for us into that market.
And the question I was going to ask, and you're just entering though, you have Epic and Cerner, who are the two big players within the whole healthcare industry, and they dominate it. And you really talk about interfacing versus integration. And if you look at the development of quantum software for the healthcare industry, the hospital and the patient care industry, not the drug industry, how do you see Strangeworks quantum software playing within that healthcare service market?
Well, the immediate thing we've done, not for a system like you're talking about, but some of the pharma companies that are partnered and working within those systems, is going to be how can you model clinical trials more effectively and accurately, right? Quantum optimization, as we've been talking about, can do everything from patient stratification, to dosage arms and sample sizes and inclusion, exclusion criteria, the control strategies, placebos versus active versus adaptive. That's the kind of stuff we have done. Now, again, for the pharma company, and their participation in the clinical trial, not for the hospital system, but obviously that's who it's affecting. And when you think about it, all of those are kind of massive combinatorial search problems, right? And so when you think about it, wanting to get smarter, faster, more efficient trials, you think of exploring millions of design configurations simultaneously, of identifying optimal trial structures, like how are they shorter, cheaper, or more powerful as far as what they can do in the results, reducing the number of participants you need in a clinical trial is one of the things we've done, or improving the statistical power with fewer runs across that as you're doing that. So I think the clinical trial thing to me is an immediate thing I'm targeting and wanting to talk to hospital systems about. We have some experience in it. There's definitely proven value in it, especially again with the machine learning example I gave earlier. You can really do a lot. And then that leads you to, okay, well, what about simulating biological response? Can you use a quantum computer? And not all of them are going to be good at this and not, but this is where it's very quickly going to drug target interactions, to do pathway dynamics. So what about off-target binding or metabolic effects or any PK, PD outcomes? These are areas where you can have an impact of fewer failed trials, better prediction in responders versus non-responders, and more accurate endpoint forecasting, which I think represents a huge, both a financial opportunity to lower costs, improve in the hospital system doing that, as well as better results for the patients, right? Like if you're testing with fewer people or getting better results before a drug's rolled out or whatever, I think those two are the first two that come to mind. That again, we've done that with pharma companies working in clinical trials with hospitals. We haven't taken hospital systems on directly, but that's why I wanted to show up and talk to you, and part of the joy of being on the podcast too.
Well, there's a couple of other players when you're talking about clinical trials. One is the pharma companies generally hire CROs, clinical research organizations, to assist in the clinical trials. And then, of course, you have the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. So have you looked deep enough yet to see where the FDA is in looking at quantum computing to assist in the regulatory trajectory going forward? And have you started identifying sort of the major CROs who are heavily involved day to day in the clinical trials that you're talking about?
Well, when you talk about CROs and you talk about how can you transform the future of clinical research, that trial modeling, I think, is very important. We have been starting to identify them. Again, this is a new space for us. We've played for about 4 years total with our largest pharma customer, about a year to two with the majority of everything we're doing in pharma. So it's a new area for us, but I think about the accelerate the trial modeling. I think about optimization of operations and logistics. And again, quantum assisted biomarkers and patient stratification services for CROs, right? They're increasingly offer biomarker discovery, precision cohorting, things like that. I think quantum machine learning would help with better genomic and proteomic clustering, identifying hidden responders and non-responder subgroups, a higher statistical power with those smaller cohorts we talked about. So I think there's a ton of selling points in the CROs. Now, the more important thing there, and for me, the more exciting thing is, what about the FDA? I don't know if you saw just a couple of days ago, the Department of War said, here are the most important things for us. Quantum was number two. Several government agencies, the national science, have looked at, okay, quantum's important. So you think, well, okay, when is the FDA doing that? Well, they're not really running any quantum computers for anything, right? For regulatory reviews or whatever. They have talked about an advanced computing infrastructure, okay, for advanced computing and modeling work streams. And that's something that quantum would plug into. So model-informed drug development, advanced simulation, predictive modeling, stuff like that. They have their Health Center of Excellence. That's focused on machine learning. I'd love to see them focus some of that on quantum machine learning. That is where the computational diagnostics sit. I'd love to see that also come in. So the FDA has kind of programs pre-positioned for quantum integration, but they're not really quantum integrated. I think where the FDA has been focused on when it comes to quantum is they're praying for quantum safe data requirements, right? And post-quantum encryption. I know that that's a concern that they have. And I know that they're collaborating with a bunch of external agencies like NIST and NIH, DARPA and BARDA and NSF on quantum readiness. And so right now, I'm afraid, I think the FDA is focused on that. How do we defend against quantum and protect the integrity of the data more than they are on here's benefits of what we can do. But again, the infrastructure that they have and that they've been building out and those partnerships with those organizations I just mentioned mean quantum will be able to easily plug into that. So I don't think they're ill prepared by any means.
But what you're saying basically is an embryonic environment, and there's many opportunities for optimization in the whole healthcare ecosystem. Some are much further ahead. Others are just beginning to learn about what some of those opportunities are. But some of that also is going to be driven by government budgets. And is there going to be money available to be able to step into the quantum world, especially if they're neophytes in that area? So from a standpoint of winners and losers now, there's been a little bit of play out in the public markets about the quantum companies, the AI companies that are out there. Valuations are crazy right now. We have in the BioHealth Capital Region, the first pure play in quantum computing that went public was IonQ, which came out of the University of Maryland and Duke, and they're still in our region. We're very proud of that. What's going to determine who the winners and losers are going to be in this quantum field 5 to 10 years down the road, Whurley?
Well, IonQ, Nicola Damasi, under his leadership, they've done a great job on going into all the quantum information sciences, right? So they've got the satellite play and the communications play and all these different things. I think that will help, although it can also be hard for a company that young to balance all of those things, right? Like that can be a challenge. I think right now, people think it's a time for a market boom, and I think it's still time for market survival. So IonQ taking advantage of their stock price that they had, pushing tons of capital, $3 billion plus into their coffers at a time where things will probably make it a downturn because of the government funding and this and this and that. Super great move, super strategic move. And I know that Rigetti and D-Wave have tried to do similar. I think long term, it's going to be the companies that recognize their place. You will not be selling a $100 million, $200 million computer. You will be a chip manufacturer. You will look like an AMD or an Intel or an ARM or whatever the case may be, and you'll do quantum chips. And by the way, the price of that computing will fall just like GPUs to pennies per whatever. And I think right now, one of the biggest challenges those companies face is in lieu of having real world revenues today, they're pushing a narrative of there's going to be trillions of dollars of money made. And I think the classic example I've heard several famous people give, and I'm not going to mention any of their names because they'd all be like, I was the first one to say that. But see, I've literally seen this at like 8 conferences, is refrigeration. The companies that made refrigeration didn't become trillion-dollar market cap companies. The companies like Coke that use refrigeration to distribute sodas across the US did, right? They became the big companies. And so I think it's a similar thing with quantum. Is like I think the hardware providers don't yet realize that their valuations are going to stabilize around them being like an NVIDIA, like an Intel, like a whatever. And that doesn't mean they can't be a $1 trillion, $2 trillion market cap company, but it probably affects it a lot. And I think there's a mismatch in a number of things. For example, when we talk about press releases from all these companies, I gave a presentation called From Research to Revenue, like the path we need to follow. And when I was at A&M a couple of weeks ago at the first Texas Quantum Summit, I gave a presentation and one of the guys came up afterwards and he was like, thank you. Like that was the most realistic thing I've heard. And the reason he said that was because what I said was, look, if you move an atom a few nanometers more and you keep entanglement or you entangle a few extra atoms, it is absolutely scientifically mind-blowing. It is incredible. But that doesn't mean anything to the public markets. And the biggest example is Google. Google announced the Willow chip in December. Their market cap went up by almost $300 billion, 260, 280 in 24, 48 hours. And everybody is like, quantum computing is here. But what Google proved was that RCS, random circuit sampling, a system they designed, could do something faster on their machine than the world's largest supercomputer, in theory, could do in a billion gajillion years. Now, there's a disconnect between when you have a solver customized for a machine and you pull a classical solver off of the shelf and you go, and you're like, wow, the one I customized, like my hot rod I built that has twin turbo everything, it's faster than the standard Miata. And you're like, yeah, no kidding, right? So I think in the markets, you're going to see a drawback. First time AI crashes or the market crashes, these companies are going to lose a ton of valuation. They'll go back to the $10 range they were in the SPACs. There's no doubt. Some of them, like IonQ, will not. They will pass that, but it's because they built in the diversification. They've taken the cash to put on hand. They've made strategic moves. Not everyone has done that, unfortunately. But I think you're looking at there being 3 major companies. It'll be Google, IBM, and potentially Amazon, not Microsoft, because Microsoft's topological plan is much more potentially powerful and very more far-reaching. And I think they've been pretty open about They're not trying to sell you topological next year. So you have kind of those three on the enterprise, established big company side. And then out of the 100+ companies on the quantum side, you'll see it reduced to IonQ, possibly Rigetti and D-Rave, but I would say QEra, Quantinuum. I love the AeroQ guys. You see companies like that. And there are hardware companies. There's a batch of about 5 to 7 of them at the bottom of the stack that aren't public who have been very, very mad. They've only raised like 13 million or 20 million, and they've been very slow to build teams for growth. Those guys have an advantage right now because when the crash comes, everybody that has hundreds of employees is going to be able to afford them. And, those guys are going to little engine that could it all the way into what I think will be 2030 to 2035, where you'll actually see what we're pretending to see in the market now in quantum, which is, oh my gosh, we made an actual breakthrough. Here's a thing that nobody can disprove. I mean, the thing that bugs me is every time you see an announcement, it's within a week, some classical guys are like, well, yeah, but we built a custom solver and it doesn't do that or whatever. And we've got to get through that. And I get why people are doing it. Everybody's trying to raise money, but we got to get through that. But yeah, you're going to end up with about 4 to 7, 12 maximum hardware companies on the startup side. And you're going to end up with probably Amazon, IBM, and Google on that. And if you'll notice, Google has always said 2029, 2030 to Hartnett's credit. Amazon has always said, come when it comes, right? IBM has kind of been like 2029, 2030, we're going to see it. When the companies that have been working with it, in IBM's case, since the 70s and have invested billions of dollars are like, this is, we think, the date. I find it a little hard to believe that people are going to be really doing something crazy before that date. I mean, it doesn't mean it's impossible, but it's a hard chance. And when companies like compare themselves to IonQ, it's like, it did come out of University of Maryland and Duke. It was the first to SPAC. It was the only SPAC that had a pipe. It was structured. I mean, it's not just about being first in a lot of areas, especially strategy. They've been best. And so companies like that, I think, will continue to see broad market success.
Yeah, they also had NEA as a great investor that took the chance with them. So we could talk all day long about valuations, consolidation, and all of the things that are going on with this whole industry, which would be very interesting. But that might be a podcast for another day. One thing I did forget to ask you, Whurley, was it sounds like quantum's a big boys game right now. So I'm an entrepreneur. I've got a growing company. I have the same optimization needs that the big pharma company needs, but I've got a growing biotechnology company with 50 people, but I need to compete with the pharma companies that have $100 billion valuations. So what's the role, or when do the small players get a chance to take advantage of Strangeworks and your quantum software development like the big players who can afford you today?
So I think they can do that today. And I'll tell you why. The small players have an advantage. All right. They have a very, very big advantage. You have one, the ability to make decisions with fewer people and move much faster. You have two, probably a much more focused problem. If you're a small startup in this space, you're probably working on one particular thing, right? One aspect that something you want to do. We're already talking to, and I think have helped a couple smaller firms that are doing AI drug discovery. And where can quantum machine learning help with that? Where can they things? And these things don't have to be super cost prohibitive. Also, remember, they can buy the software platform and do some of the work themselves. So we have customers that look like that. So I think the problem with quantum for the big companies is actually that, is that a company of 5 or 10 people with access to that kind of resource could all of a sudden do market displacement.
They can be very dangerous, right?
Very, very dangerous. So I actually think there's more of the smaller people looking at it than there are the bigger people when I'm out at conferences, when I'm talking to people, when we're talking to customers. And I think the bigger people need to pay closer attention because the smaller people are getting it. And already the cost is coming down. 4 years ago, you couldn't buy, kind of like you could on Amazon, per usage. You had to buy these big blocks of time. Then you could buy per usage. Now the per usage is coming down. Now a lot of companies have credits that they're giving away for the hardware. So a startup that has a really interesting idea that might be a great use case for somebody like an IonQ or Rigetti or D-Wave or any of these might be able to get some credits on the machine, or even credits to a third party like Amazon that they could use where they all have a success story together. And so I think the startups definitely have the advantage in a quantum world.
Great. Spoken like an entrepreneur with an emerging leader company that develops quantum software, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. I'm going to let you close now. We could go on for a couple more hours, but talk a little bit about what you see in the future. sum it up in some very simple terms for our listeners around this whole quantum world, technology, AI, machine learning world. What's going to happen and evolve over the next 3 to 5 years that they should be paying attention to?
Well, this is probably the number one question I get all the time, every day. And as I often say, before I go into that, just very quickly, there's three takeaways people should take from this call. Quantum computing is a rapidly advancing reality, right? With transformative potential. We're not in the like, oh, it could happen. It's not a if, it's a when, right? And the role of AI and the critical impact it'll have in accelerating quantum progress. Remember, one of the things people don't talk about enough is artificial intelligence being used to understand quantum mechanics, this thing that's so mysterious and crazy that we don't really have our heads wrapped around. And so the most important thing to take away is like everybody listening to this should be involved somehow. So what does the next 3 to 5 years hold? There'll be a slight quantum pullback. I know I've said that for a while. I know it hasn't happened, but it happens everywhere. It happened multiple times in AI. You saw it. It's happened in every industry. You can't get past the economics and the impact of policy and market changes and all of this. Unfortunately, you're going to see in that time frame the rise of nationalism in quantum. You're already seeing countries that are like, ooh, what can we allow to be imported or exported? European Union is already setting up things just like they did with AI around quantum. So you're going to see a big regulatory impact in the next 3 to 5 years. On the development side, you're going to see at least 100,000 qubit machine in the next 3 to 5 years. And that means you'll have at least more than 100 logical qubits. And 100 logical qubits, I think everyone in quantum and everyone in physics would agree, you see massive world changes, especially starting with and first in biohealth innovation and chemistry related things, right? Like molecular chemistry and things like that. And I think you'll see that. And I also think you're going to see a lot, unfortunately, a lot of quantum companies that don't exist anymore, but it won't be all bad. They won't all just die as startups. You're going to see massive consolidation over the next 3 to 5 years as we start focusing on, and look at IonQ, you mentioned them. They're a great example. How many companies have they acquired this year? So you're already seeing the consolidation in the market, but you're going to see it really, really accelerate. And you're going to see the big boys come in. You're going to see Google or somebody buy a QR or buy a Quantinuum or buy a thing. This is going to happen. So rise of nationalism and unfortunately regulatory stuff kind of on the policy negative side, 100,000 qubits and a lot better noise reduction and error correction on the technical side. And then on the market side, a consolidation that honestly is going to be good, because how are you going to go out, especially a small business, and go, there's 100 of these and I have no idea how to tell the difference? It's going to be much easier when there's 3 or 4 or a dozen of them for you to compare. And when there's some standards, which is the thing that I think we'll really see finally after 10 years of trying to get quantum standards. I'm finally going to see success somehow, even if it's something I've just influenced, that there's quantum standards so that buyers can say, I understand that 5,000 annealing qubits is equal to X amount of superconducting or X amount of ion trap. And this is what this means. And this is how I can use it. And I think the standards will drive the adoption, which is kind of the last thing. You'll see a lot more companies adopting. About 100 of the Fortune 500 now. In the next 3 to 5 years, it'll be 100% of the Global 2000 and all of the Fortune 500. It'll have to be, because it'll still be emerging, but it won't be as nascent.
The best thing about this podcast is it's being recorded, and we're also going to do a transcription. So I can come back in 6 months with you and we can take a look at what your projections and the futurist has said about this industry.
I would get together with you every 6 months on that.
Okay, we'll do that. Andy Eckert, our actor, would love to host that as well, too. So we've been speaking with Whurley, who's the CEO of Strangeworks, one of the most knowledgeable people in the whole quantum world. And we appreciate him coming on BioTalk today. And we're going to have him back as a regular guest because he's very stimulating, very innovative, and a lot of changes going on within his world that we'd like to keep up with. So, Whurley, thank you for being on BioTalk today.
Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate the time and the opportunity. And you have been not just an amazing podcast host, but a gracious host when I came to visit you up at your conference. So it's just nice to reconnect and chat with you again. You always ask extremely good questions. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to BioTalk with Rich Bendis.